I was presenting and researching deaths after the vaccine. Now I've contributed to the publication of over 25 scientific studies looking at vaccines, COVID shots, autism, and many other things. We looked at every single case that was published of a death after a COVID-19 vaccine, and they had an autopsy. Most of them died within a week of the vaccine. And 35% of these deaths were from sudden cardiac death, followed by strokes and many other things, multi-organ failure. And we basically demonstrated that the COVID-19 vaccines do, in fact, cause death.
Thanks for coming and hanging out with us. This is definitely by far going to be your most psychotic interview. Well, he's normal. Dr. B's normal. This is the guy who saved my life on repeat. But I am not normal, and I am a psycho mom who's all over the place, who has no rhyme or reason to how I ask questions. It's just like a mom at her doctor's office, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? So that's what you're going to get with me. But actually, I'm not really that bad. The truth is, you guys are going to speak doctor words and terminology, and then I am going to chime in and be like, no, speak to the moms, because only we understand, sort of idiot language. It needs to be broken down for us, certain things. But
Definitely.
I guess the first thing is, how'd you start doing this? I like that story. I like how you came into all of this. It's pretty morbid, but I guess we'll start at the beginning and then go backwards a little bit. So, and you have to know that we are huge wellness company fans over here. I mean, I must have 100 of your I have every single emergency case for every family member. I mean, I have you guys on blast, emailing one of your ladies nonstop for everything. So you guys have been a savior, especially with the ivermectin and all of that. So, all right, I'll stop running an ad for the wellness company and tell us how it all started for you with this topic.
Yeah, so everything began about 3 years ago, actually 4 years ago, in 2020, when the entire debacle happened with the vaccines and the lockdowns and the mandates and all of the garbage. I was basically sitting at home. I just graduated from undergrad with a Bachelor in Science, pre-health professional studies, but I wanted to really make a difference and do some research and actually uncover what has happened to humanity, in 2021 and beyond. And so to do that, I was like, well, all right, epidemiology, public health sounds like the way to go to do this as fast as possible and start making a difference. So I went to University of Michigan for a master's of public health in epidemiology. And at my time there, I was very thankful. I reached out to every single professor for an internship. All of them said no, except one. And it took about 2 months. I emailed all of them. So while I was waiting for a yes, I emailed Dr. Peter McCullough, and he responded in 5 minutes with an internship idea. And that ended up being a systematic review of autopsy findings in deaths after COVID-19 vaccination. So at the heart of University of Michigan, I was presenting and researching deaths after the vaccine. Many professors didn't like me. They wouldn't even look at me when I would present it at the poster session. And since then, and actually also a professor said I wouldn't have a career if I continued to do that research. But I proceeded anyways, graduated, that paper was published. And now I've contributed to the publication of over 25 scientific studies looking at vaccines, COVID shots, autism, and many other things.
But what in that autopsy data, it was insane. Like you guys were, can you just share some of that some of those stats. That's
Yeah. It's it's very shocking, sadly. What we did was we looked in the entire internet, the entire peer-reviewed literature, so the scientific literature, that's where studies are published. We looked at every single case that was published of a death after a COVID-19 vaccine, and they had an autopsy. There was 325 of them. So we collected all of them. We put them in a massive, what's called adjudication table with the autopsy findings, their clinical vignettes. So, how old were they? What medications were they taking? Which vaccine did they get? How many doses? And what did they die from? So we went through the list and we found 73.9% of these deaths were from the vaccine. Most of them died within a week of the vaccine. And 35% of these deaths were from sudden cardiac death, followed by strokes, pulmonary embolisms. So that's a clot that basically goes through the heart. And many other things, multi-organ failure. So the whole body just shut down in some of these individuals. Myocarditis, vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia. That's basically when these clots form all over the body. And cytokine storm. So basically it's an autoimmune attack on all of your body's systems. So those are the main causes of death. And we basically demonstrated that the COVID-19 vaccines do, in fact, cause death.
Yeah. How do you feel that you're contributing to vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah, well, vaccine... What was that?
Wrong podcast.
Sorry, wrong podcast.
Podcast.
We're here to set you up. No. So we saw all that on CNN and Fox, right? All that information. Was that?
Yeah, right.
No?
Yeah, it was on Fox, MSNBC.
Yeah, all of them.
But is it only going to be when they come out with it? I was saying this to Del last week. And, by the way, I'll get into that later. But is it only going to be once they say it, when all of America already knows that everything they're saying is bullshit? But for some reason, if they say it, it'll have some sort of validity, even though nobody even watches the news anymore. It's weird. And it's also, no one trusts the alt media either now, because I think if people feel like that's been infiltrated too at this point. But that's a whole other freaking topic. But back to this data situation over here. Did you guys say that at the end of all of this, that it will look as if we have lost more people to the COVID vaccine than the deaths of World War I, II, Vietnam, and Iraq combined in the U.S. alone? Is that correct?
That's an accurate statement, unfortunately, because now we have 3 independent estimates of American deaths from the vaccines. One of them is 470,000 from Pfizer alone. That was based on a study by Florida Surgeon General Joe Ladapo, found Pfizer recipients faced a 37% higher risk of all-cause mortality of death compared to Moderna recipients. So just extrapolating the deadly effect, the higher deadly effect of Pfizer compared to Moderna yields 470,000 American deaths, minimum. And then we move up to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. There's been 19,000 American deaths reported to that, but less than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported to VAERS. So you can actually multiply that by 100. But to be conservative, we multiply 19,000 by about 30. Just to get a conservative estimate, that's about 600,000 American deaths. And then lastly, now we have another estimate using CDC Wonder data. It's official government data, basically causes a death in the population. And there's been 840,000 American deaths from the vaccine, according to that data. That's 840,000 excess deaths, not from COVID, not from anything else. And so that's extrapolated to be from the vaccine.
And that's
And
an
so it's
important
very-
point, Nicholas, because a lot of detractors will say, well, that's actually just lumping in COVID deaths. But that's all taken into account in this data. And
yeah,
you're
COVID
familiar.
killed about a few 100,000, but yeah, that's separate from the COVID deaths.
Yeah. And you're familiar with worldwide data like Dr. Denis Rancourt's study showing that you're looking at, worldwide, almost incomprehensible amounts of deaths, up to 20 million.
Yeah.
20 million.
Yeah.
But when this happens with the deaths, I mean, I know that it is all these different ways of taking people out, and I feel like the deaths are just going to keep piling up, and they're not going to be reported because they had a magical way of enveloping it in cancer, heart attack. So now the cause of death will be cancer, heart attack, especially if it doesn't happen right after the vaccine. It's easier to pinpoint, okay, she had the vaccine or he had the vaccine a week ago, but now we have people 3 years later or 4 years, 6 years later, whatever it is now. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that COVID was 6 years ago, actually. Yeah. To me, it seems like it was yesterday because I feel like my whole existence is about that now only.
Most of the data is being hidden from the public. I mean, completely. The average person has no idea that any of this exists. They live in a bubble and they watch mainstream media. So the narrative given to them is that they used faulty, the Imperial College of London did that in the beginning, just faulty projection models and saying that the vaccine saved millions of lives. And then they just subtract whatever numbers you come up with, say, no, actually the net benefit, which is absurd because it's based on a theoretical model that isn't really based in science. Maybe you want to cover that a little bit because that is what they use as a defense on this.
Yeah, we can. That's very important to cover. Yeah, the false claims that the vaccine saved millions of lives is a false claim. It's not true. It's based on one of the studies was published, I believe, in the Lancet, and it's been widely cited and widely claimed, used by the media to say the vaccine saved like 10 million lives or something ridiculous. But what they do in those studies is, they're based on complete fabricated models. And the inputs of those models is what really exposes the fraud there. And so what they did is they assumed in these calculations that the vaccine stopped transmission by quite a drastic number. And they don't at all. Now we know, like, for sure, 100%, they do not stop transmission. So just wipes that model out. And a few studies that have been conducted have dismantled all sorts of things regarding these claims. But really, the vaccines saved 0 lives, but they took millions.
Exactly.
I saw you talking about that even with the measles vaccine.
Yeah.
Calling it the death program, the measles death program. So this is just I do want to get into what's different about this vaccine from all the other ones, and then what the old vaccines are going to look like moving forward if they're morphing into this type of technology. Because I think parents are still, just lining their kids up. I mean, they took my son away from me while I was sleeping and vaccinated him in the hospital. So, and I didn't, they just assume, I guess. They just assume.
It's what you want.
That you want them circumcised and you want them, well, I guess maybe, yes. But still, I remember waking up and like, where's the baby? And they were like, oh, they brought him in the back to do all this stuff to him. And I'm like, so they just switch out my child too while they're at it? Sorry.
It's really evil.
Okay, so back to the COVID vaccine. For people, because I have a lot of people that literally unfollowed me in my life, that I know this is so stupid, numbers of Instagram, things like that. But it means something to me only for one reason. They really thought that I was either evil or insane, and those were the people that whenever I'd post something, it really was dedicated to them in a loving way, like in my own weird little, like, I just hope that some more people wake up and know the truth about what's going on, not to prove any fucking thing about I might have been right, because I don't really care if I'm ever right about anything. In fact, I actually wish I was wrong about all of this stuff. I wish it was all me just being a crazy conspiracy theorist all this time. Also because of you. Thanks to you. Thank you. But I would love for you to break it down for friends that really just don't have any idea what the technology was in the vaccine. I mean, I know I could interview you and you could do it and stuff, but you're out there talking about this all the time now. And it would be great if you could. I mean, there are two main components to this vaccine, that it's the delivery system and the actual, what is it? You guys explain this to me like I'm...
Well, maybe explain to her that it's not a vaccine, it's gene transfection technology.
And then explain that to
and what that means.
Yes, gene therapy, all of that, please. What does that mean?
Yeah, so for all of the listeners, the COVID-19 so-called vaccines are not vaccines. They are gene therapies, or what's called gene transfer technologies. How they work is they have messenger RNA, modified messenger RNA, genetic material encapsulated in what's called a lipid nanoparticle. These lipid nanoparticles, your body takes them up easily. Your cells take them up easily. So when they're injected, it doesn't stay at the injection site. It's now been verified to go to all of your vital organ systems, including the brain, the heart, the reproductive system, the bone marrow, the testes, the ovaries, the adrenal glands, the liver. It goes everywhere. And once it gets there, these lipid nanoparticles, release this modified mRNA into those cells. And then that modified mRNA tells your cells and your vital organ systems to make a highly pathogenic, a highly dangerous, lethal, deadly, non-human protein, the spike protein. The spike protein was designed in an American and Chinese biosecurity lab. So when you have cardiomyocytes in your heart, or heart cells, or neurons, brain cells, making a non-human lethal protein, your own body attacks those cells, and that will result in brain damage, heart damage, etc. So again, these are not vaccines whatsoever. They're gene therapies telling your body to make a dangerous protein.
Right. And that's a lot different than a traditional vaccine using a live or an attenuated virus. And that's what people think this was. So it's important for them to understand the distinction there, because from there we can determine how it's damaging everyone. And there really shouldn't be any argument about it. I mean, there's now been thousands of studies showing the damage it does. But unless somebody understands the fundamental difference between an actual vaccine and what this is, then there's no way we can get them to understand how damaging it is. So, and the fact that what you said is true, is that you're producing the body into a factory for spike protein. There's never been any safety data on that. I know they tried for 20 years to make coronavirus vaccines and failed for various reasons. And, part of it is this autoimmune type of cytokine activity that happens, this IgG4 switching and the attacking of your own cells in the body. So it won't be hard now to go to the next steps. We're going to talk about all the damage that it's doing in the different systems, and the numbers will start to make sense. But you have to understand that sort of physiology, that pathophysiology of it for people to. And so I think what people were told is when that data started to come out, they just said, well, that's just the virus. And that's not true. And that's been delineated in the studies and in the data. You could definitely separate them. You can tell damage from a COVID vaccine in the heart versus a coronavirus. And even, I think Dr. Ryan Cole made that very clear, because he was one of the ones doing the autopsies on these people early on and was showing how to differentiate. Because they're fed a boatload of lies every day, and they still are. So we have to be able to counter those lies with real data and actually an understanding So I think understanding what you did there is beautiful. Just, this is how this actually works. It's not a vaccine. And then we can get into why they did that. And were they really trying to stop a virus? Because they knew it wasn't effective. They knew going into it wasn't effective. And I don't buy the argument that they knew that they thought it was effective. Because even in the Pfizer, you may cover Pfizer's own data and actually what happened in those clinical trials. I think there were 1,200 dead people by the end of that initial data. So what does that tell us? If they were allowed to come forward with something that already had that kind of a track record and then release it to the market, and I think before we pulled vaccines, when there's been as few as 10 deaths, I mean, the swine flu, I think it was 25. This was never touched, even though the VAERS data was showing that it was in the thousands. So maybe you can explain why that is.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. The COVID vaccine death reports have exceeded past vaccine withdrawal limits by like 400,000%. Yeah, the swine flu vaccine, the rotavirus vaccine, that was pulled in like, I believe the 90s or maybe 2010. I don't remember the exact year, but that was pulled for like 15 cases of bowel obstruction. And so we have 19,000 reported deaths. And yeah, nothing happened.
Nothing.
They
just pulled chikungunya for the same thing.
Yeah. The chikungunya, I believe that was 2 deaths.
Yeah, 10 deaths. So it's kind of insane that this is happening, and yet the medical establishment is accepting all of this. And that's what I find confounding, is this goes against the Hippocratic Oath, it goes against, and yet almost as one organized, mind-melded unit, they're protecting this technology, and they're trying to put it into everything. Now it's into cancer therapies, and of course we're going to cover that, the connection between the COVID vax and cancer. So is any wonder that Pfizer started looking into treating cancer? So I think understanding that whole spike protein and turning the body, and is there an off switch for that? Do we understand there's an off switch for stopping the production of the spike protein?
Unfortunately, there is no off switch now that we're aware of. In fact, we just published a paper. We found Pfizer mRNA, spike protein, and DNA from the vaccine in an individual 3.5 years after his last shot. And so in some individuals, it's not leaving, it's persisting, perhaps it's integrating. We published another paper last year finding genomic integration of mRNA injection genetic material in a stage 4 bladder cancer patient. So this is very unfortunate. This genetic material is long lasting. The spike protein is long lasting, and there is no off switch that has yet been developed.
So they've rushed right in and examined all the vaccines for contamination and to see what's going on, right?
No, they didn't look at anything. Nothing.
What? Oh, but so that's interesting. I think it was Dr. Kevin McKernan actually opened the vials up and found the DNA plasmid contamination. I think it was at, I want to say 60 billion.
Well, how do we explain all the differences between all the batches? Because I have every kid that walks into this house, I'm like, look up your batch, because all my daughter's friends are vaccinated, and they all look up their batches. And when Lindy, the veteran, this young veteran who we can't figure out what the hell is wrong with her, and I have to show you all of her stuff, all her paperwork that she sent me the other night, and I forgot to send it to you, but these other kids, most of them, thank God, their batches don't have that many, very few adverse effects. Do you think some people were actually getting placebos or vaccines that were, I don't know, not effective? And also, of course, I need to know about the J&J, because so many people come to me. I've become like, I don't know anything, and everybody comes and asks me, and then I have to send him text messages, and I drive him insane all night long asking questions. So-and-so has this symptom, and this is happening here, and this is happening there. What could this be? Are they vaccinated? How many? Which one? Blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff. So the J&J, everyone wants to know if the J&J was the clear one. Was that the one that they pulled off the market because it was actually not lethal? So they pulled it off the market, saying it was the one that would cause the DVTs or whatever kind of clots that. But I try to remain hopeful. I know you always say no, but if there's any fucking ounce of hope in any of this, I have to, say it. So yeah, J&J, I would like to know that. But go ahead, you guys conduct the doctorly conversations, but every now and then just address some of the things the old lady's asking.
She has some questions about J&J versus the other technologies. So you might want to touch on that for her.
Yeah, definitely. J&J. Well, first, I know you mentioned, Kevin McKernan with the DNA. Yeah, Kevin McKernan, his team, Dr. Speaker in Canada. Many teams have looked for DNA contamination. They all find it, but the FDA has never looked. So I just wanted to say that. But
Amazing.
Johnson & Johnson was viral. It's called viral vector technology. It's not messenger RNA. It basically uses some modified chimpanzee virus that basically inserts. Inserts DNA into your cells to produce the spike protein. So it's still a very dangerous mechanism, and they were very dangerous. I mean, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson were very similar, same sort of mechanism there, and they were both lethal in a lot of circumstances. The blood clotting issue was very real, and but you're right. Why did they pull that one and not the mRNA? Well, probably because Pfizer and Moderna was, paying or giving large sums of money, perhaps to some key regulators. We don't know exactly why, but it was dangerous. It gave a lot of people strokes, and we actually now understand that the viral vector ones may actually be carcinogenic. A study found increased cancer risks with AstraZeneca vaccines.
Yeah, I saw it with several patients, so I know how dangerous it was.
So is it a long-term also, like the way the mRNA is? It would have long-term effects, or were they more short-term, heart attacks immediately, blood clotting immediately, cancers, quick cancers?
I don't know if you guys have looked at the long-term data on the J&J and AstraZeneca comparatively.
No, unfortunately not.
Yeah.
There's very limited data on these Johnson & Johnson ones in particular because they were pulled off so early. We don't have any case reports either of Johnson & Johnson recipients, and the research, the literature is basically void of specifically J&J long-term effects, unfortunately.
And there was no talk of boosters with Johnson & Johnson. And the Pfizer Moderna, then the booster charade came in, and you've got to get a booster
on top of the J&J.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't matter. You can mix and match. If you have J&J, it doesn't matter. You can get this. So there was no science going on. It was almost like they just had to get that into everybody's arm.
I have so many friends that are like, I just took the one and done J&J.
One and done,
And I'm like,
that's probably why they got rid of it.
I was like, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
You're fine. Nothing's
Many people were, but here we're talking about numbers over time. And now we've had, 5-6 years to really look at the data. It is completely obvious, but it's very important for people out there to actually get that message and that data. So doing interviews like this with people like you who are working hard, the McCullough Foundation has been all over this. It's really important. And to cover the topics, and a lot of them have heard of things like spike protein. They don't know really what it is. They've heard of the risk of cardiovascular strokes, and now the clotting. We interviewed, was it Tom Haviland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Major Tom
Haviland.
Major Tom.
And, he took it upon himself to go to Congress and show them the clots in jars. But these are, it's another thing probably we should cover now is what these amyloid proteins do in the body. Besides the vascular system, they can get in the brain as beta amyloid proteins and plaques and cause early dementia, but maybe you can cover that as well.
Yeah, that's a very, very serious situation.
Yeah.
So a study came out in October of last year that looked in so-called long COVID patients, but they never verified their infection status. 94% of them were vaccinated. So we would actually assume they were long vaccine patients, but they looked in them. And 100% of the vaccinated in that study had what's called amyloid microclots. So this is misfolded proteins, misfolded fibrin in specific, that basically conglomerates and forms large masses. It kind of sticks to a lot of things in the body, ends up blocking blood vessels, blood flow. And unfortunately, these amyloid microclots probably, or for sure, do travel to the brain, resulting in that amyloid deposition in the brain, early dementia, like you said. But they also appear to be the main components of the long, giant, white fibrous clots that Major Tom Haviland and the embalmers he's spoken to have been pulling out of large numbers of corpses. About 20% of corpses these embalmers are seeing have these giant white clots that are abnormal. They don't break apart.
They've never been seen before. They've never been seen before.
Yeah.
That's important to know.
And nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a big lid on this, and it's the elephant in the room, because this is the long-term damage right in front of our faces. And at this point, I've seen it in my own practice, like 16-year-old boy having to dig out a clot this long out of a leg, things like this doesn't make sense. And none of this, and when they try to normalize it and put, I think it was a bus ad they had somewhere, I think in Europe or UK, and said, kids get strokes. No, kids don't get strokes. No. I don't know where that came from, how anybody's going to buy that nonsense. But normalization seems to be another thing they do, because as we saw the athletes dropping.
Yeah, how many? Like, where are we at with that? And everyone just forgot about it. No one talks about it anymore. And newscasters who were pushing the shots, then all of a sudden falling down on air. My kids, there was a little girl that we know whose best friend died of a stroke. He was 7.
Yeah.
And then last week, one of Robbie, my boyfriend's friends, a 40-year-old woman, had a heart attack working out. Yeah. Nobody has a fucking heart attack working out.
I mean,
I'm afraid to lift weight. That's why I won't work out anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm just afraid because I might have been shed onto.
Yeah. And so, this is, again, something that has to be addressed, but in a big enough way that enough people see it. And I would say that more people are watching social media now than are watching mainstream media. So they've lost on that account. Those numbers are down precipitously. And the message going out now are more messages like this getting out there, but there's still a lot of censorship, as you know.
I mean,
it's difficult to
take my account
the truth out there
nonstop.
Yeah.
I didn't have my account for 3 months.
Yeah, that's it. So, looking at the long-term data, what you have so far from everything, that's all contributing to the approximately 600,000 Americans that did not fall prey to COVID, but to the vaccine. What people are wondering is if there's no off switch for this, and this goes on, and you're looking at neurological damage, cardiovascular damage, oncogene off switching, things like P53, those genes that protect us from cancer, BRCA genes. What are the implications now? What are we seeing in the data already that's showing that this is already happening?
Yeah, so the cancer situation is another one. So we went through the clots, we went through the, heart damage, brain damage, but yeah, it doesn't end there. These shots appear to be carcinogenic. And again, CDC wonder data, CDC mortality data does show about 136,000 excess cancer deaths since 2021. So since the vaccines rolled out, we have this giant signal of excess cancer deaths in America. And the problem is that cancer signal is accelerating, it appears. So more and more people in excess, more than normal, are dying of cancers at ever increasing rates. And so that indicates that the population was exposed to a carcinogen, very potent one. In fact, one of the most potent carcinogens in modern history. The signal appears stronger than asbestos, smoking, and other things. But the mechanistic science and the population science now match up. 2 studies with 8.7 million people combined in them compared vaccinated to unvaccinated and found the vaccinated suffered increased risks of 7 major cancers, including colorectal, bladder, breast, prostate, thyroid cancer, gastric cancer. All of these cancers were higher in the vaccinated individuals, vaccinated with mRNA and viral vector. So we see it there, but then we do see these the mechanistic evidence, the molecular evidence. We published a paper in the World Journal of Experimental Medicine where we found the mRNA shots in those who were injured and developed cancers, thousands of genes were dysregulated. So the gene expressions were abnormal. So their genes were not working as they should. Genes related to immune function were shut down. Cancer surveillance genes, like you mentioned, P53 was down-regulated. So their bodies cannot counter and surveil for these cancers as well anymore. And the shots induced hyperinflammation. And cancers love to grow in areas of high inflammation. And then lastly, it dysregulates the immune system. So you have less T cells. We see T cell exhaustion. You need T cells to fight these cancers. And when you exhaust them, good luck. These cancers are going to start growing. So, yeah, it's very strong evidence now. And it's very unfortunate.
Yeah. Encouraging, right? Yeah, I think the T cell exhaustion we're seeing a lot and anybody that treats patients has seen this just in the frequency of illness. So for instance, this year, I don't think I've ever seen the amount of illness and in bacterial infections, viral infections with people coming in. It just eclipses some of the past years, and definitely even COVID. So I'm like, where is this coming from? And obviously it's impaired immune function. And we could argue that maybe even the virus itself did that to some extent. I know Dr. Robert Redfield, the former director of the CDC, had made a statement to something along that line, that the whole thing was a big experiment. And,
takes us back to chemtrails.
Yeah.
Was he not saying that he thought that they were dumping it out of airplanes?
Yeah, a lot of people thought that. I mean, obviously it's a bioweapon. Obviously it was not, the whole thing was, you don't have two pharma companies step up right after it and go, hey, all done. We're ready to go. Okay, we're just going to do this quick clinical trial. And I mean, first of all, it's absurd because they haven't been able to do it in 20 some odd years. Why would they suddenly have it all locked down? And then the patents on it all. I mean, Dr. David Martin covers that in extreme detail. So obviously something fishy is going on. The fact that they let, with the data that's out and the published studies, that they let this thing stay on market is reprehensible. I mean, as you said before, any other signal, 10 deaths, 25 deaths, it would have been pulled. We're at thousands and thousands now, perhaps millions worldwide. And yet, even in our current administration, that wasn't the first line to draw in the sand. And so I don't know if you're getting any feedback as to why that is, if it's just pharmaceutical control over political candidates, over legislation. But I think that's where people have to really look deeper, because now the mRNA technology is going to be the savior, according to them. New vaccines, new cancer treatments, without any evidence. So I think that's another thing to cover, is how now, with all this cancer, how they're going to come in to save the day with the very same technology that may have caused it.
Yeah, that's exactly why they're not pulling them off the market, because they want to unleash mRNA for every disease under the sun, and so it appears that even the current HHS administration, some components are compromised still by the pharmaceutical industry or other entities that may seek to inject humans with messenger RNA. So it's very disturbing. They should have been pulled off the market years ago. They should have been pulled off right when the new administration got in, but they haven't. They're still being given to 6-month-old infants. So that's very disturbing.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, you know, they induced the cancers with the mRNA, COVID mRNA shots. And then they offered the treatment of it with more mRNA. And it's,
what could go wrong? Yeah.
Do you guys remember when Biden was giving some speech and he was on another planet, and he, out of nowhere, it was completely non-related to anything he was even talking about, and he starts talking about how we're gonna find a cure for cancer.
We're gonna get cancer cure.
And I was, and I clocked it. I was like, this is exactly in response to the COVID vaccines, and he 100% knows that. And he shouldn't have said what he just said, but it slipped out of his senile mouth, or it didn't, or it wasn't even Biden, it was somebody else, and they were basically planting the seed for what was to come, because they seemed to do that too. But
yeah, I saw the writing on the wall for that one pretty early on.
I couldn't believe he said it. I was like, wow, here we go. Cancer is going to be on the rise. And boom, within months, it was just rampant.
And how much have you seen childhood cancer? Maybe you can cover that. Childhood cancers escalate.
Childhood cancers. Well, this actually relates to the childhood vaccines.
Yes.
I don't have much data on mRNA with children and cancer. I don't think there is any. But I mean, cancer rates are increasing though in young children, particularly colorectal cancer. It's now highest, I believe, in like 20 to 40-year-olds, which is not normal. But regarding the childhood vaccines, we published a reanalysis of the Henry Ford vaccinated versus unvaccinated study, the one that was revealed in an Inconvenient Study, the documentary. Very important study, but we looked at the raw data there. It was 18,000 children. 16,000 were vaccinated, about 2,000 were unvaccinated. But the vaccinated children had 54% higher cancer rates. And so they were suffering more cancer. So it appears that even the childhood vaccines may be contributing to childhood cancer. Probably, and I just want to say this one thing, probably because there is fetal DNA fragments, trillions of fragments. It was proved in a 2015 study in the MMR vaccine vials. And
SV40.
No, not SV40, just human DNA.
Is in some of the childhood vaccine. So I think it was polio that it first came out in. So that is a known cause.
Why do they do that, guys? Can you guys tell me why they the fetal tissue and vaccines? Like, what is that? Is there a benefit to this? I just want to understand. I don't know.
Well, they use cells from an aborted fetus that was aborted in the 1960s. They use its lung cells in the factory to make the vaccine proteins, specifically the rubella component. So they use this to churn out rubella proteins to throw in the MMR shot, but they don't clean it well. They're supposed to clean out all this DNA, but they don't. And so you have these fragments left in the vials, and then you inject it directly into a kid, and that can get into your child's genome. These fetal fragments from, the aborted fetus from the 60s, this can possibly contribute to cancer.
Yeah.
From the 60s.
Yeah.
I need to understand. I just want to understand that as well. Science. But I mean, are they still doing that? Are they still using, they're still using aborted tissue in vaccines
until they're all mRNA, which is their goal.
So the mRNA replaces the fetal tissue.
It's a completely different system, but their goal is to make everything mRNA. You can maybe cover the flu shots, because I always find that interesting, because people say, well, I still get my flu shot. And how many studies have to come out showing that they're not only ineffective, but have been shown to actually increase your chances, so negative efficacy. So maybe you can cover the flu shot stuff as well.
Yeah, the flu shot's a complete failure. In fact, just yesterday, it was on, I forget which news station, but they ran a story saying, this year's flu shot efficacy was the worst in 10 years, and it didn't really work. And so, it's just a failure. But the big thing is there was a study by the Cleveland Clinic, with 50,000 healthcare workers in it. They looked at the vaccinated who got the flu shot and the healthcare workers who didn't. But the healthcare workers that got a flu shot had a 27% increased risk of developing the flu or getting the flu. So the flu shot's increasing your risk of flu, not decreasing it like it's supposed to. So it fails. And a study came out about a year ago that found increased risks of dementia and Alzheimer's with the flu shots.
The flu. Great. That's why my mother had dementia.
I think there was a study in Japan that showed that after the flu shot, there was, I think, a 4-fold increase in pneumonia from other viruses, which I found very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're going to trade getting the flu for getting pneumonia from another virus. So it's obviously impairing the immune system.
Exactly.
And then some of the toxoids, now we're talking about, how it could be affecting the brain. So, so I think we can kind of put to rest the efficacy of the flu shot. But they still bill it as the thing that's saving humanity from the flu, which disappeared from the statistics during COVID. Maybe you could cover that how they did the little sleight of hand with taking typical deaths from flu. And then suddenly that disappeared, flu disappeared, and it was all in the COVID column. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was all BS for sure. Flu doesn't just disappear. Yeah. Flu deaths magically went away, and then they all became COVID deaths. But we have to remember 86% of the PCR positive COVID cases, the study just found, were not actually real COVID infections. They had no antibodies. And so, they were cranking up what's called the cycle thresholds. Yeah. Yep. And just false positives. So, lots of these people that so-called died from COVID didn't even have it.
So they were going into hospitals for other reasons, and they could take a PCR test and crank it up to 40 cycle threshold and pick up all kinds of nonsense to give you a false positive. And now that anybody that died in the hospital then was just branded as a COVID death. So the PCR was used to first develop cases and then eventually transferred into death. So, and then the hospitals obviously were paid pretty handsomely per patient, per diagnosis and per toe tag. So that's how the whole thing worked. When we say a plandemic and a scamdemic, they had to get, this had to come down from the top to have the money flow down into the hospitals to make sure that they were using this faulty technology, PCR testing, which even Dr. Carey Mullis said you can't use the way that they were using it during COVID, not to diagnose
that was
the disease.
Like right in the pandemic that was all coming out. I mean, but is it true, this is because you brought up the PCRs, is it true that there was also some type of, I don't know if it was graphene oxide or like something on the tips of the PCR tests that were pushing other things into.
It was interesting how, for the first time in history, they're taking these long things and shoving them up to your cribriform plate in the back of your nostril to diagnose this disease.
Blackjack was coming home with nosebleeds. They were PCRing the kids every day at school. Every single day. They went to school with barcodes, and then they got PCR'd all day. And if your kid wasn't vaccinated, they were like sequestered somewhere else. That was my kids.
I think we can agree the whole goal was to get everybody on a vaccine passport QR code scenario. And
that's right.
They still think they're going to somehow achieve that.
It's my next question.
I know. Okay, there you go. So she's worried about, of course, the nanotech.
No one will let me talk about it. I even tried to bring it up with Dell last week, and he was like, you just want to talk about it. Yes, I do want to talk about it. And anytime I bring it up, and even one of the doctors who I wanted to bring on here to talk about it, she won't even get back to us, Mihalchia. I want to understand. I've been following her crazy dark field microscopy stuff forever. I mean, I know not everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon because I know you guys are all working towards like really trying to streamline the reality of what's happening here without getting into the weeds too much on all of the little details that are possibilities. But at the same time, we were listening to Rashid, I don't know how to say his name, Buttar, back in the day. And, those statements while COVID was happening were huge statements. I don't know if you're familiar with his story, but, he was talking about the vaccine actually having sleeper cells in it that would be activated at some point with the right type of frequencies, 6G, back then it was 5G.
Yeah.
And then he was gone. I mean, anybody that talked about that at that time, they're gone. They're not even here anymore. And I know you were, and I'm not trying to make you talk about it.
But it's gone.
You can plead the fifth if you feel like it, but I want to understand this BISC chip thing, the BISC chip thing, and uploading our consciousness and how that's even friggin' possible. But even before that, this whole idea of anything self-assembling, I mean, I feel like the fibrous clots were in some way, I mean, how do they come together? I mean, that goes into your body as a nanoparticle, and then all of a sudden everything is this long.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories as to that, is because you could just say that's the inflammatory response of the body, and with the spike protein, and then these amyloid proteins will do things that we've never seen long rubbery clots like that. That's something completely
it's insane looking. And I think if the regular person sees something like that, I mean, they're going to want a fucking explanation. What is this? And if, when I was talking to Dell about the self-assembling nanotech stuff, he was like, those are salt crystals. I looked at 100 vials. We looked at 100 vials. And I'm like, okay, I don't need to be right or anything. I just want to understand. I want to understand. I'm just a regular person who doesn't know anything about medicine. Just know that.
How far would Dr. Evil go if I were Dr. Evil? Is there such a thing as nanotechnology? Yes, there is. 100%. And there's literature showing it. There's studies showing it. There's patents on it. Was it in the COVID vaccines? That's all theoretical. We don't know. I don't think anybody's proven conclusively that it's there. But it's a real possibility. Listen, the push for mRNA was clearly an agenda. They know it didn't work for COVID, so there's another agenda behind it. And human A, getting into the human genome and transcribing is a transhumanist movement. So they're very proud of it. They talk about it all the time. And ways of doing that and achieving that on a nanomolecular level. So they have meetings about this. They have articles about it.
I mean, I saw paperwork way back when at that time that were saying that if you had this much inside your body, that you wouldn't be considered for human rights. It was really bizarre stuff.
Too, yeah.
It was government paperwork. And I don't know, that was definitely.
Let this guy talk.
I'll stop talking.
What do you think?
I'll tell you, self-assembling technology is real. Nanotechnology is real, and in fact, they have versions that you don't even need to be injected. But I would comment on some of those microscopic images of some of those chip-like components in the vial. Some of it was degraded cholesterol from the lipid nanoparticles. Yeah. I would say that, but then again, there has been a chemical analysis of these vials, and there are like 40 undeclared elements in there. So again, we don't know for sure, but anything's possible. Nothing's been ruled out, but nothing's been confirmed either. So, but I would be more concerned about how your brain and heart are expressing a toxic, lethal protein first and foremost. That would be the main concern I would have. And then, if they want to use this nanotechnology, they could use it via other means as well. But yeah, when you mentioned the BISC biological interface system to cortex. This is a new brain chip that has been developed, and it will go in, it'll rest actually, I think, on top of the brain. It'll go there through some sort of minimally invasive surgical procedure, and you'll have to wear a relay station on your head to power the chip. But you will then have access to artificial intelligence. You basically will merge your consciousness with AI, and you won't be human anymore. At least that's what I would suspect. You will probably have enhanced cognition. You may be able to see, X-ray, infrared. You may be able to communicate telepathically with other brain chip users. And again, this isn't science fiction, by the way.
No,
I mean, Musk is out there saying all this stuff. So it's a lot of different things, but it's a very dangerous path, because eventually they may even start to mandate these. You may need them to participate in society, and it's a very dangerous path. I won't be taking these brain chips.
No?
It may be, popular. Everybody's going to start taking them. I will not.
Well, it'll be on Instagram, and there'll be girls doing this, talking about how cool it is. And that's how you get a certain generation to take things.
I mean, that'll be another separation of the masses, people who are that greedy, that need to have that much information at their brain tips.
Well, listen, obviously, one of the biggest goals is control over the human psyche. And so you saw that during COVID, because it was a psychological op from beginning. And any of us that had half a brain could see what was going on. And that's why we didn't take the shot. We didn't fall in line and buy the narrative. So that meant you had to look yourself to see what was really going on. Whereas a large swath of society just followed along. And I think it was Psychology of Totalitarianism, if you've ever read that book.
That Matthias Desmet
Dr. Matthias Desmet book is the best look at how this all happened.
They don't
why
need
people
chip.
go along with it.
We did it.
They don't
Everybody
need chips.
followed.
People will follow. A percentage of people will do what they're told. And all you need is fear. So you have to operate you get to activate the limbic brain. It only takes a couple weeks of activation to really kind of lock them into that. And then suddenly that's what all the masking was about. Masks don't stop virus transmission. It's absurd. There's no science behind that. It's right on the box. They read it. So all of that was, and there's lots of studies now showing, masked versus unmasked states, countries, and and you're aware of that. It really didn't show. There wasn't a signal of protecting anybody. So what was it for? Well, it was for control. And if the more people are controlled and they buy a narrative, so why wouldn't they go with all that way into controlling your brain? So the thing you're talking about with the BISC is an implantable chip, but they have the nanotechnology to do it other ways. And I know they can. I know they're working on it. So of course that's their ultimate goal. So waking people up, letting them see what's going on, understanding the gravity of this and where we're at, and not going along the next time they dream up another pandemic, whether it's bird flu, whether it's whatever the other thing that's broken out recently, Nipah.
What about I didn't know this before either, with the hepatitis B shot.
Yeah.
And AIDS. Is this a real thing? Is that for real? That it was put into the hepatitis B shot and then sold to the whole gay community? And then that was, I know that you always talk about the fact that that it's in the in this vaccine, in the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
Vaccine.
Well, I think 3 glycoproteins for HIV is part of how they got the assembly structure to get the spike protein into the cells. So it doesn't mean you have HIV, but it means you could detect it with a PCR test because you've got that glycoprotein. And they used it, obviously, because that's the first thing you have to do is evade your immune system when they put the injection in, because the first thing your immune systems do is light up the cytokine system and say, what the hell is this? I don't get a virus this way. I get it coming in through mucosal immunity. So the whole idea of the lipid nanoparticle and turning off the suppressor genes, they could get something into you to then put the machinery in place to spread it from cell to cell in the body and organ to organ. And I think we saw a lot of that very early on. There was a lot of theories about that, but they've all proven to be true. The stuff that was called conspiracy theory. And it's nice to see somebody in epidemiology truly understand this on a deep level. And the question is now, where is it going from here? When we have all this in place, how do we get this message out there on a bigger level and get people to truly understand? Obviously, you want to protect the children. There's still parents giving their kids this shot, which is unbelievable.
It's mandated here.
Yeah.
And in New York.
California. It's like
New York and
New
California.
Man, I don't know how they get away with this. So we got a huge fight. And we have to come together. So there can't be this infighting among who's right and wrong. There has to be a unified front. And we thought we were going to get that with RFK in office. And what we found is that he came up against a lot of what they call burrowing, putting people in place to obstruct policy. And now it's like people are disheartened with that as well. So I don't know if in your foundation, if you've come up with any other ideas on how to really ratchet this up and get the word out. But making podcast appearances like this, pressure politically, I don't know if that's working out. I know
That's just it's only Rand Paul. He's the
people
only one.
licenses.
Thomas Massey, they're the only ones.
Yeah, you got two people.
Man, we got nobody now.
Yeah, who do we have? So when most of Congress is I don't know, bought by pharma, how do you get this message out there?
Yeah. Well, obviously not through the mainstream media, but when you see these studies online, when you see our posts, when you see, whatever, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your networks, and don't be afraid of what other people think of you, because that's the big reason why so many people, they just stayed silent, and then, their whole family went and got, their 8th booster. Just don't be afraid. Share this information is critical. Nobody else should be taking mRNA boosters, so don't be afraid. Don't care what people think. And lastly, the best way to get out of this situation would be, because they're going to do it again. They're going to roll out more mRNA shots. They're going to roll out more vaccine passports for some other, something else that they cook up. Don't take the mRNA booster. Don't take any future boosters. Don't take the brain chip. Don't take any of this stuff. And if enough people don't take it, we'll win.
Exactly. It's when people blindly trust authority. And now they've gotten to a point where at an all-time high of how they don't trust authority anymore. I think that's making a big difference. So the work you guys are doing there is tremendous, and we really want to thank you for all of that, because that's the most important work being done these days.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Can I ask about cancer? I need to ask about this whole this declassified, classified cancer thing that was from the 1950s that I saw you talking about.
Yeah, definitely. That's so basically in the 1950s, Soviet scientists discovered that anti-parasitic medications had anti-tumor effects. And so for some reason that was classified by the CIA up until about 2011. So for over 50 years, for some reason, they kept the knowledge of antiparasitics and cancer suppressed and buried. But now we understand why they buried it. Perhaps they didn't want, any good cancer treatments out there. But now we have many studies, over 100 studies actually, showing ivermectin has 12 anti-cancer mechanisms across 12 cancer types. As a recent study by Dr. William Mack has documented complete remissions in stage 4 cancer patients with fenbendazole, another antiparasitic.
That's a peer-reviewed study as well.
Yeah.
That's
So I tried to get my brother really on that, but they opted for all the other stuff and gave him bits of that. And I was like, man, that's not going to be the thing.
Yeah, it's important to understand. And people go, well, how can an antiparasitic treat cancer? But because it attacks the same pathways of how cancer cells thrive. And so And then, of course, people say, well, does that mean parasites cause cancer? I go, well, not necessarily, but there may be some connection. We may discover that more and more down the line.
Well, how do like membendazole, all of those antiparasitics, do they just inhibit the growth? Like, how does it work? Because people don't believe it. They think that's absolute insanity. And, a lot of, at least even my own family and friends, they don't.
Well, when they say that, you just tell them literally in the laboratory, they expose cancer cells to these compounds and, they shrink, right? And so and again, there's literally over 100 studies now where they show this type of activity. And so it's not fake. It's very real. And one of the key ways it does this, and it's not very understandable to a layman, it inhibits what's called cancer cell signaling. So basically how the cancer cells kind of communicate, help grow, it kind of cuts off that communication. And, so it gets very complex. It also appears to eliminate cancer stem cells, which is very important. You don't want cancer stem cells to be, propagating. That's like the source of some of these cancers. So it attacks the source in some of these cases. So it's very promising research.
I mean, I remember when Macus was saying that I don't know if he's saying this to not piss off the Western medicine too much, but that there even was some kind of a synergy at times between the chemo and low dose. I guess if you're really that far along and you're really at the end of your game, maybe. I mean, I even heard that with naltrexone, with that, who's that English doctor that I love, the old guy? Danglish?
Oh, Danglish.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
I think.
Angus Dalgleish.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah.
I like that guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was researching everything for my brother, I was like, naltrexone. Oh my God. I mean, I took that stuff when I was a young maniac. And that was pretty astounding to hear that also, I guess, what is it with the receptors? I mean, why am I even trying to? You guys have to jump in and rescue me and say what. You have to finish my sentence, one of you.
What he's saying is you're attacking how cancer cells grow and replicate. And so antiparasitics are really good at that from what we see. And I don't know that they work for all cancers the same, but for the ones that have demonstrated efficacy, it's for sure demonstrated. And there are clinical trials showing that. There's lots of data, there's lab data, and there's Macus's study, I think, was the first larger peer-reviewed study on using a whole protocol successfully. So it's not like they can say there isn't any science behind it. There is. But if you just keep throwing out words like horse paste and, parasites don't cause cancer, they're all just distractions of actually what the science is.
How do those medicines help with COVID? I mean, I remember when you guys were talking about that cytokine thing, that was what these doctors were telling me when I had COVID. You don't understand. You think you're fine now, but by day 7, the cytokine storm is going to take you over and you're going to die by day 9. And I was like,
not true.
Texting you. But you had COVID at the same time I did.
Yeah, that's true. But I think somebody extremely immunocompromised.
What does that even mean? What is a cytokine storm?
Those are, the cytokines are what give you, if you're sick with the flu, it's not the flu giving you the fever and the chills and the body aches, it's the cytokines. And so the cytokines will create inflammation. And many times, they were saying with COVID, they would get the respiratory, they completely they weren't even treating COVID as the kind of disease it was in the beginning, because it could have been treated with existing medications and natural remedies. And it was for many, many people. But we know the vaccine wasn't going to do anything. And then somebody have COVID, they tell them to go get the vaccine, which made no sense. You say, well, all of science from the time you're first taught immunology is that when you're exposed to a virus create an antibody response, you now are protected. But that all went out the window because they needed people to get the shot. So when you saw science disappear and people on TV in white coats saying things that were completely counterintuitive, it was pretty obvious what was going on. So yeah, the cytokine stuff, they blew that way out of proportion, I think. And most of what was happening in the hospitals from the deaths was actually from the treatments. I don't know if you agree with that, but from what we see, definitely.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just in school. You're young. We're old. You were just in school. You know what they're teaching in the medical industry over there in school. Why are so many doctors, young doctors and older doctors, what is, if they're trusting the science and everybody's saying trust the science, and I had friends saying to me, well, I trust the science because I have a family full of doctors, and I'm like, but all the science I'm looking at in alternative media looks like it might be accurate, and it's the complete opposite. And even if we don't know which is real and which is not, the fact that there are conflicting ideas of what the real science is, why wouldn't anybody be talking about it or looking at it? I understand everything's captured, everything is controlled. I understand that. But there are so many doctors like, they're like McCullough, like Mary Talley and Sherry Tenpenny, and all of these like sort of lone wolves out there that are. And then I have my pediatrician who literally drops my kids over a Tdap vaccine. You know, if everybody knows the science and they've been trained in the medical field, then why are they not all looking at, are they looking at data that's just not true, that is wrong? Or are they just not looking at anything at all and telling you to vaccinate your kids?
No, they've been indoctrinated by their education and by their mentors, etc. And the studies they look at just basically look at sometimes just antibody production, which is not indicative of real protection, or sometimes vaccine efficacy they'll look at. But what they don't look at is they never look at the serious adverse event profiles and the risk benefit profiles of these shots. Many of these individuals just pretend they don't exist. And that's, I think, the big problem is, unfortunately, vaccine ideology has actually become a religion where there's no such thing as deaths after a vaccine, where there's no such thing as neuroinflammatory injury, brain damage from a vaccine. And so they've become enwrapped and warped in this ideology. And this has contributed to, so many, unfortunately, pediatricians injecting 6-month-olds with mRNA shots.
Yeah. Blind trust in authority again, whether it's the average citizen or your average medical doctor. It's accepting dogma that was passed down from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, as truth. And we might want to end on this. We pulled out of the WHO, but explain what is being replaced with.
Yeah, the World Health Organization is well, we got out of that, but there is I don't remember the name of it. You might want to touch on that with There's some sort of group that was formed that's outside.
It was a group. I think Gates is involved. Gavi.
Yeah, it's the same thing. They just rebranded
They're just rebranding it. I think.
Yeah, and I think we're giving them a lot of money, but regardless, the WHO itself is captured by Gates Foundation.
Completely.
Gates is the top funder of the WHO.
Yeah.
But yeah, now we're getting involved with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and all these other entities.
This feels like a shell game.
So what is Kennedy in there freaking out, or is he in there I know that everybody hates hearing the words 5D chess at this point, but I mean, what else are we going to call it? I don't know. And I'm curious to know what you think of his cabinet, but you can also just say that you don't want to talk about that. That's fine. But because I don't know what to think. Is it keeping enemies closer? I don't even know what to think about Malone anymore. Like, I just am super suspect of almost everybody out there.
I would just say when you get into politics, it's not It's not really going to be the full truth anymore. And it's very sad. It's very sad. And I say that with regards to, for example, now all individuals involved with HHS, they're not allowed to talk about vaccines anymore because they're approaching midterms, and they said that. And so it's very dumb. Again, 6-month-olds still getting mRNA shots, but they're not allowed to talk about it because midterms are coming.
Midterms, yeah.
So it's just foolish, and I'm not a big fan of these political games.
But do you think that
that.
the Russian vaccines and the Chinese vaccines and all of those were a lot of placebo-like vaccines? The countries that were feeling that, even though they're part of the big system, a little more sovereign, had different ideas on, they play ball, but they still love their sovereignty.
Well, it's interesting. It broke out China,
had,
supposedly, and they didn't use the mRNA vaccine.
Yeah, that's what I keep seeing, the Sputnik and all of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, Sinovac in China, was not mRNA, it was just spike protein, which is still toxic,
Still bad.
But it wasn't going to be as bad as the mRNA. So at least they cared a little bit more about their citizens, surprisingly, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that, but that's what happened.
It's amazing. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting because nobody could really answer as to why they did that if this was such fabulous technology.
Now, the only answer to why they would do this to us, why they would create a vaccine like this, why they would plan this whole thing out, and no one can, I think it's just too hard for people to hear it, that there is a depopulation plan in effect. But is there any other valid explanation that a normal person who is like, you're just a conspiracy theorist, is there any other way to explain it?
Well, conspiracy theorists, anytime people say that now, it actually just means, you're right. And you're just saying facts, because every single conspiracy we've said, for the past 5 years has turned out to be true. In fact, almost all of them now turn out to be true. So,
damn it.
Yeah, the people who will still, use that language towards, people like us just saying the facts, they're completely gone, and I feel bad for them. We've reached a point where we just gotta keep telling the truth, and I think we can get in a much better situation as the public begins to wake up.
100%.
I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure,
and then I'll let you. I know. I told you I'm annoying.
The guy's hungry. He's thirsty.
I know. I'm going to let you go in 1 second. I know you have to go and get all the data together for the next.
He's heading over to Fox News after this.
Well, speaking of conspiracies, and everybody talks about it being conspiracy theory, the shedding aspect, because there's a lot of us that are not vaccinated, and I get sick often, and you know it. And I actually was sitting in the car with my assistant who had just gotten vaccinated. And she'd chewed a huge wad of gum, put it on her soda can, and we're driving around, our masks on, windows open. And that night I got home and I was deathly sick. And she texted me, she goes, dude, I'm so sick right now. And I was like, me too, you got me sick. And then I was thinking about that wad of gum, and she had just come from getting her second shot. And I was like, I'm now vaccinated. And we had all the same symptoms. We were totally sick. And is it true? Is the shedding thing a thing? Because I've been looking at all of these different studies, all of these different doctors that are talking about the stats on the non-vaccinated. And a lot of them are very similar to the vaccinated. So,
yeah, shedding appears to be real. And there's not much data on it, but we're finding vaccine components in exosomes in people, which can be exhaled through breath, be found in saliva. It's being found in breast milk and sweat. And so we believe these can act as vectors for some of this vaccine material. And then there was a paper recently published by Sue Peters, and she and her team found that the unvaccinated women who were in close proximity to vaccinated women outside of the household daily, within at least, I believe, 5 feet for a few hours, those unvaccinated women had a higher risk of menstrual cycle abnormalities. So that's indicative of possible shedding, because we know exposure to the vaccine basically threw the menstrual cycles into chaos. And so, it appears it's possible.
It not only appears it looks like Pfizer in their own clinical data was keeping track of that very thing by looking at when they were around other people or around pregnant women. They wanted to, notate all of that in detail. So it's almost like they knew ahead of time and they wanted to see what the outcomes were.
Were you ever going to see that Pfizer stuff? All those,
yeah, you can see the papers.
the big thing that they were all talking about. Forget about that. Who cares at this point? We all know the truth about what's inside those documents.
First 9 pages.
The dog vaccine. I have to ask, and then I will let you go.
Sure.
I am because we have dogs here, and they always want to vaccinate my dogs. And supposedly now these vaccines the dog can give the human the fucking vaccine.
Well, the mRNA stuff.
Or whatever it is. It's not a vaccine, the treatment, the therapy, the gene therapy, whatever it's called. Is this a thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's real. It's called Novavax NXT. It's developed by Merck. They're giving these actively at veterinarians across the country for canine flu, rabies, and if you have a cat, feline leukemia virus. This is a self-amplifying RNA particle technology where they will inject your pet, and your pet will indefinitely replicate the RNA and be producing these toxic proteins for indefinite periods of time. This can probably shed onto human owners through, if their dog jumps on you and licks you, your cat licks you, that may expose you to Novavax NXT. And you do not want to be exposed to that. They barely tested it, and it's just a disaster.
She was a rescue. She was vaccinated. A 100-pound dog that was rescued.
This one was vaccinated?
No, the big one, the giant, the 100-pounder. Yeah, and he's a puppy. She's a puppy.
Well, not all vaccines. It's only that one, Novavax NXT. Yeah. Just make sure it's not that one.
Are they intended for us when they vaccinate the dogs that way?
I don't think so. I mean, who knows at this point? I think they just don't care. They've been injecting pigs with RNA shots since 2012. So they just inject the animals with this stuff, and
so is the mRNA in the food supply? Is that with all the CRISPR stuff? Is that
CRISPR?
Is it supposed to be in the food supply?
Yeah, they're using CRISPR technology. And they're looking at growing it into your food, into your vegetables.
The mRNA.
Yeah. So they obviously want that technology integrated in the human genome. That's clear. So however they get it in there, they get it in there. Wow. You drink it, you eat it, you breathe it, you inject it. So there is obviously an agenda. And so it's just up to waking people up to not taking any more of these.
Can you guys start bottling your own water for us all, please? Can you guys have the McCullough water soon? Because we can't keep drinking all of this toxic shit. Yeah. I think that needs to be the next thing you guys work on, okay? Can you bring that message to the boss?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us for a little bit today.
I really enjoyed it. You're doing amazing work over there.
You really are.
And God bless you and your mission.
Yeah, thank you so much for being out there, being our mouthpiece for us lowly folks over here trying to get by.
Survive.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys, and keep up the great work. Keep spreading the vital information, and I think we can win.
I do too. Yep.
I hope so.
Great. Thanks again.